Multiple congressmen have been able to review unredacted versions of the Epstein files, and they say it's unclear why many of these redactions were put there in the first place, since the names of potential co conspirators and perpetrators of abuse have been covered up from public view. But as we can now see, this has turned from a prosecution for justice into a political opportunity. Yesterday, two representatives addressed reporters after getting the chance to view some of the quote, unredacted Epstein files. There was Republican Thomas Massie from Kentucky, as well as Democratic Representative Ro Khanna from California. But from the way they put it, a lot of what they were seeing wasn't even truly unredacted.
Our bigger concern is that there's still a lot that's redacted. Even in what we're seeing redacted versions. I thought we were supposed to see the unredacted versions. And that's because the documents produced to justice from the FBI, from the grand jury was redacted when they got it. So we kept doing the searches for the unredacted information. It's the identical redactions that they have. Now, I don't think that's nefarious on the career attorneys that were reviewing it, but they obviously haven't gotten the production because our law says that the FBI and the original grand jury needs to be unredacted.
Right.
So essentially, these members of Congress were supposed to be able to see the files with no redactions whatsoever, compared to the heavily redacted files that have been shared with the public. But when they actually took a look, they found that a lot of those redactions were still there because when the FBI turned over many of these documents to the Department of Justice, they left redactions in there. So those unredacted versions are nowhere to be found. That's a serious miscarriage of justice, particularly when we look at the timeline and impact of what's happened so far. Back on December 19th, the Epstein Files Transparency Act was passed. This was legislation that was heavily pushed by Epstein survivors, women who came forward to testify about the abuse that they suffered and have received no justice for. What they wanted was for the public to have access to this information, but instead, what the public got was files delivered late, incomplete, and heavily redacted in all the wrong ways. The names of alleged perpetrators and co conspirators were the ones that were covered up, while at the exact same time, the names of dozens of victims were left unredacted, putting their lives in danger, as well as revealing tons of intimate information about them. Things like email addresses, details of sexual assaults, even nude photos were included in these files. But meanwhile, names of powerful men like Donald Trump and Lex Wexner, the founder of L Brands, including Victoria's Secret, those things were covered up. So the public doesn't get to see that, but the victims are re traumatized all over again. It feels retaliatory. These women came forward begging for justice, and instead, they were further exposed in all the wrong ways. Meanwhile, none of these perpetrators have been held to account. And even members of Congress are starting to speak up about how ridiculous all of this is. In that interview with reporters, Representative Massie noted that what bothered him the most about his viewing of the files was that the names of at least 6 men that have been redacted are likely to be incriminated by their inclusion in these files. He would not provide the names of those individuals, but he said one of them was a US citizen and another was an authoritative figure in a foreign government, while Ro Khanna noted that one name belonged to a high-profile individual. Massie, who, mind you, is a Republican, said that Attorney General Pam Bondi needs to do a little more work and that she could possibly make the names of these 6 men public. This is after Massie and Khanna reviewed the files for just 2 hours on Monday. We know that there are millions upon millions of Epstein files. So this is just the revelations from 2 hours worth of reviewing them. When it comes to figures in another government, one thing that we know about Jeffrey Epstein is that he does have extensive ties to Israel's government. And at the same time, figures in the UK have actually stepped down because of their links to what's in the Epstein files. But here in the US, where much of this activity took place, we haven't seen the same kind of ramifications echo through our halls of government. Perhaps that's because Donald Trump is currently the president of the United States, and his administration is full of overlap with figures named in these Epstein files, including Trump himself, who's named tens of thousands of times. but Trump denies any culpability. And the head of the DOJ is a man who has served in a personal capacity as Donald Trump's own lawyer. He says there's no credible information incriminating the president, but we can't trust him. There's a clear conflict of interest at play. Representatives Massie and Khanna weren't the only Congress people to view these unredacted files. Democratic Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland also got a chance to look at the files, and he said much of the same thing.
Redactions of names and information about people who clearly are not victims and may fall into that other category. So I went over there and I was able to determine, at least I believe, that there were tons of completely unnecessary redactions in addition to the failure to redact the names of victims. And so that's troubling to us.
Did you see the names of any potential co-conspirators that were redacted?
Well, I saw the names of lots of people who were redacted for mysterious or baffling or inscrutable reasons.
Are any of them well-known individuals?
For example, Mr. Wexner, his name was redacted from a government document. And I couldn't understand the logic of that. He was not a victim, and his name has appeared other places. Now,
so right there, Representative Raskin mentioned the name Les Wexner. As I previously said, this man is the billionaire founder of L Brands. It's an Ohio-based company that includes Victoria's Secret as well as Bath and Body Works. And Wexner was one of Epstein's closest associates. Epstein worked as a financial advisor for Wexner, being able to control vast sums of money and other assets up until the pair split. Wexner denies culpability, but victims like Maria and Annie Farmer have come forward to talk about their experiences with these two men. Maria Farmer actually reported them to the FBI way back in the 1990s, and nothing came of that report, which just goes to show layer after layer after layer of institutional systemic failure to protect women and girls from sexual abuse. That failure continues to this day. The Justice Department is continuing to cover up the names of wealthy, powerful individuals like Leslie Wexner, throwing victims like Maria and Annie Farmer under the bus in the process. It's clear who their alliance is toward, and that should concern absolutely everybody, because safety should be the number one priority here, and it's not. Raskin went on to talk about another document he saw in the Epstein files, which contradicts an important claim made by Donald Trump. Trump claims that he kicked Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago and prohibited him from coming back after he learned about Epstein's bad behavior. But what Raskin says is, I saw one document, which was an email that was sent by Jeffrey Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell, which was the forward of an email that he had received from some of his lawyers, giving an account of a conversation between Epstein lawyers and Trump lawyers and others about what had taken place during that 2009 period. It was during the period of the 2009 investigation, and Epstein's lawyers synopsized and quoted Trump as saying that the Jeffrey Epstein was not a member of his club at Mar-a-Lago, but he was a guest at Mar-a-Lago and he had never been asked to leave. And that was redacted for some indeterminate, inscrutable reason. I know it seems to be at odds with some things that President Trump has been saying recently about how he had kicked Jeffrey Epstein out of his club or asked him to leave. And this was at least one report that appeared to contradict it. So at this point, the entire premise of the Epstein Files Transparency Act has been flouted. Victims and survivors of Jeffrey Epstein pushed for this act. Epstein survivors pushed for information to be revealed that could implicate powerful men in these crimes. But instead of doing that, the Department of Justice, which we know is under Trump's thumb, has further obstructed that justice from being able to take place. So now we have inaction in the 90s, a plea deal in the early 2000s, inaction in the 2010s, and now we're in the 2020s. 4 decades of government failure to address systemic child sexual abuse. That is harrowing. It's something that every American should be concerned about. Meanwhile, the only person who is currently in prison because of these crimes is Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's former partner. But when asked to testify in a deposition, Ghislaine has pled the fifth. And she's using her current position, as well as who's currently in office, to try to create some sort of deal to wriggle her way out of this. PBS News reports Ghislaine Maxwell is not cooperating because she is campaigning for a Trump pardon, according to Democrats. This article goes on to say, an attorney for Ghislaine Maxwell told lawmakers Monday that she would be willing to testify that neither President Donald Trump nor former President Bill Clinton were culpable for wrongdoing in their relationship with Epstein, according to both Democratic and Republican lawmakers who exited a closed-door deposition with Maxwell. Democrats argued that Maxwell's assertion was an appeal to Trump to end her prison sentence. Representative Melanie Stansbury quoted saying, "It's very clear she's campaigning for clemency." The Republican chair of the committee, Representative James Comer of Kentucky, said it was, quote, very disappointing that Maxwell declined to participate in the deposition. But as we can clearly see through all of these Justice Department failures, there's no reason for Ghislaine Maxwell to volunteer incriminating information. No one has been held accountable for their association with Epstein, even despite the amount of evidence in these files. In addition to that, given the blatantly corrupt nature of the Trump administration, Ghislaine Maxwell is positioning herself to gain her freedom in exchange for potentially hiding important information. And again, why wouldn't she? She was Jeffrey Epstein's right-hand woman for years upon years upon years. Our justice system has yet to find a way to reckon with or address this. In fact, it's laying the groundwork for Ghislaine Maxwell to potentially even get out of prison. And here's what Tennessee Republican Representative Tim Burchett has to say about that.
I believe Maxwell's attorney told everyone beforehand she wasn't going to say a word. What options does the committee have in that case?
Well, for her, nothing, ma'am. I was the one that called it. Made the original motion to subpoena her. I think her attorney's advising her, as her attorney should. You know, she'll get clemency and she'll spill the beans. And I don't know. I don't see that happening. I see maybe she gets out early on good behavior and does a humongous book deal and probably ends up committing suicide by getting shot in the back of the head 5 times. Because this thing goes very deep and the people involved in it are very powerful.
Wow, that is that is sort of shocking to even hear that. But yeah, it's
the thing that's frustrating about this positioning is that members of Congress are basically throwing up their hands at this stage and saying there's absolutely nothing we can do. But that's not true. Now, is it? They have power vested within them to hold other branches of government accountable. They're just choosing not to use it. And instead, as we can see with that quote about Ghislaine Maxwell being shot 5 times and it being framed as a suicide, they're actually leaning further into conspiracy theories. But the problem with conspiracy theories about this case is that it's a thought-terminating cliche. It essentially implies there's nothing we can do, so why do anything at all? Despite there being an absolute mountain of things that could have been done correctly. The Department of Justice could be held to account here. They are acting in violation of the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which was signed into law by President Trump. We have multiple failures here of checks and balances, and we need people in Congress who are actually going to take this seriously. Americans have had enough. Epstein survivors have certainly had enough. Anyone who cares about the plight of sexual violence victims in this country has had it up to here with the government inaction and hypocrisy surrounding this case. If something doesn't happen soon, I predict we're going to see a wave of unrest in this country that not even the most conspiratorial Congresspeople can quash. I hope we don't have to get there, but if we do, it's because we want to demand justice.